Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Iraqi political parties. This episode was requested by CH on YouTube. If you want me to do another country's political parties, you can either comment them down below, send me an email, send me a message on Patreon to my patrons, shout out to them by the way, or send me a request through my feedback and request form in the description. I currently have requests to do Lithuanian parties, Singaporean parties, Czech parties, Greenlandic parties, Swedish parties, Thai parties, Norwegian parties, Finnish parties, Hungarian parties, Latvian parties, and many more. If you want to understand Iraqi parties, we should take a second and look at the demographics of Iraq itself. The three largest ethnic/religious groups in the country are the Shia Arabs, mostly found in the south and seemingly make up a slight majority of the country, or close to it. Sunni Arabs, found in the center and west of the country, and are estimated to make up a wide range from 10 to 30%. And then finally are the mostly Sunni Kurds, who are found in the north and make up between 10 to 20% of the population. While the exact numbers for these groups are unclear, it's undoubtable they make up a large chunk of the country's population. I guess something like 80% to even maybe 90% of all Iraqis belong to one of these three groups. Other major demographic groups include the Iraqi Turkmen, Assyrian Christians, Yazidis, and Shabaks. All groups mostly found in the north, and since the American invasion, have been in a steady decline. It's important to set the groundwork for these various groups, since Iraqi parties are largely sectarian organizations, getting most, if not all, their support from one community of the country. There have been hopes that the country will slowly start to come out of its sectarian phase, but these hopes have largely not materialized. Among the Shia Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and the Kurds, there is a lot of tension. The history of these tensions goes back to the mid-20th centuries, so I'm not going to discuss all of it, but important to note that during Saddam Hussein's rule, the Sunni Arabs were dominant and were able to oppress the two other groups. After the American invasion, the new Iraqi government, made up of various opposition movements, decided in order to avoid a government that would be controlled by a single ethnic group, they would divide up top government jobs in a system that has become known as the Muhassasa. So, for example, since 2005, all Iraqi prime ministers have been Shia, all presidents have been Kurds, and most of the speakers of the legislature have been Sunni Arabs. While the system was supposed to ensure every community had some influence in government, it instead resulted in massive corruption and elites able to deeply entrench themselves, preventing any reform or change from coming to the country. This has in recent years resulted in increased dissatisfaction and massive protest. Let's start looking at the political system of the country. Iraq is a federation, being made up of 18 or 19 governorates. One of the governorates is officially unrecognized. Each of these governments has a governor and a legislative council, which I'll try to mention throughout the episode, but what I'll say is I had trouble finding out who the current governor was for each governorate, so I suppose when I mention governors, take them with a pretty big grain of salt. Iraq also does have a federal region, the Kurdistan Regional Government, or KRG. The KRG is located in the Kurd majority north and has a significant amount of autonomy given to it, so I will mention party strength there as well. Iraq technically has two legislative chambers. The upper chamber, the Federation Council, is listed out in the Constitution but has apparently never had a session, so de facto the only legislative body is the Council of Representatives. The council is made up of 329 representatives who are elected via proportional representation. There are 83 electoral districts found throughout the country, with every district sending between 3 and 5 representatives. At least 1/4 of the council has to be made up of women, and 9 seats are reserved for minority groups, 5 for the Christians, and 1 each for the Yazidis, Shabaks, Mandaeans, and Faili Kurds. It votes on rules and regulations, elects the Prime Minister, the most powerful political figure in the country, and the President, along with some other important ministerial figures. I also want to note party strength in the council seems a little murky, so again, take this all with a big grain of salt. Finally, I want to note loyalty to any one party is fairly low. Last election in 2021, the most voted for party won just 10% of the vote. The rest of the vote was split with over 30 parties managing to win at least 1 seat in the council. This has resulted in a very fragmented parliament, with a sprawling coalition required to keep a legislative majority. I'm not going to be talking about every single party, largely because information is sparse for many of them, but I will try to mention all of the largest ones. There should be an election coming up later this year, so it'll be interesting to see if any party can manage to get over 20% of the electorate, something that some parties were able to do in the 2000s. But this seems increasingly unlikely today as sectarianism, elite infighting, and disinterest, or maybe more accurately, distrust in party politics for many ordinary Iraqis has led them to not trust any party. Speaking of that largest party, they actually don't exist anymore, but I still want to take a second and talk about them. They've gone by a couple different names over the years, but they can be referred to as the Sadrist. The Sadrist are followers of Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Al-Sadr comes from an influential clerical family, and after the American invasion in 2003, quickly became a very popular and influential figure among many of the urban Shia poor in the country. Al-Sadr would, in the mid-2000s, form several different militias that resisted American forces occupying the country and engaging in killings against Sunnis in areas they controlled. Starting in the 2010s, Al-Sadr began shifting towards a more Iraqi nationalist perspective, calling for an end to sectarianism, something many of his critics find a little ironic, corruption to be rooted out, and for foreign powers, both America and Iran, to stop meddling in Iraqi affairs. In the late 2010s, he found electoral success coming first in 2018, with the aid of the Iraqi Communist Party, and in 2021 by itself. However, despite being the largest party after the 2021 election with over 70 representatives, in 2022, the Sadrist representatives stepped down, protesting corruption and the Muhashasa system. In 2023, al-Sadr would announce that he was leaving politics, citing infighting in the movement, leaving the future of the Sadrists uncertain. However, this, quite frankly, isn't the first time he has done something like this, saying he was stepping away from politics and then coming back all over again. And recent reports seem to suggest that al-Sadr will return and his movement could run in this year's election. The Sadrists remain the most popular party among Iraq's poor Shia, along with getting a decent amount of support among civil servants, and is popular in the Sadr city neighborhood in Baghdad and the Maysan Governorate. I believe the current governor of Al-Qadisiyah is affiliated with the movement as well. Also, fun fact, Muntador al-Zaidi, the man who threw the shoe at George Bush during the press conference in 2008, ran in the 2018 election, not as a Sadrist, but under their political coalition, the Marching Towards Reform Coalition. He was not elected to the council, and from what I can tell, he hasn't contested an election since. So now the largest party in the council is the Progress Party, or Hizib Takadum. Takadum is a relatively young party, being formed in 2019 by several prominent Sunni politicians. Most notable would be Muhammad al-Halbusi, a businessman, representative, ex-governor of Anbar Governorate, and from 2018 to 2023, Speaker of the Council of Representatives. Al-Halbusi was credited by his supporters as being responsible for cleaning up and bringing prosperity to the Anbar Governorate in the aftermath of the Islamic State's defeat in 2017. It, in the 2021 election, presented itself as a liberal, competent party that would fight sectarianism, strengthen the power of an independent and non-political judiciary and army, and would be able to turn Iraq around. It's largely a Sunni Arab party, finding the most support in Anbar. It currently has 39 representatives, and the governor of Anbar is a member of the party. Al-Halbusi is currently a representative. Al-Halbusi and Takadum were debatably one of the most powerful players in Iraq in the early 2020s, but over the past 2 years, this support seems to be largely eroding. Al-Halbusi in 2023 began to see many of his once political allies turning on him, claiming he was corrupt, established Anbar as a clientelistic one-party state under the Takadum party, as being a puppet for more powerful Sunni politicians, and ruled his party in an authoritarian manner, silencing any dissent against him. In 2023, the Supreme Court of the country removed him from the office of the Speaker of the Council of Representatives, and several politicians associated with the party abandoned it. Takadum is representative of many parties we will talk about throughout the episode. While they claim to represent new reformist forces that will clean up the Iraqi state, often they are just as corrupt as the older, more established blocs, and ruled by one or several strongmen who use it as a vanity project. Next election, I'm guessing Takadum is still going to be active, and probably will get at least some seats, but whether they're going to be in as dominant of a position remains to be seen. Next, we have the State of Law Coalition, or Tilaf Dolat al-Qanun. The State of Law Coalition was founded in 2009 by several parties that backed the prime ministership of Nouri al-Maliki. The coalition has been made up of several different parties throughout the years, but always centered around al-Maliki's Islamic Dawa party. The Islamic Dawa party was formed back in the mid-20th century, representing Shia clerics and Islamists as a counterweight to Marxist and Arab nationalists in the country. It started to grow especially after the Ba'athist takeover, working with the Iranian revolutionary government to promote an Islamic Iraq free from Ba'athist repression towards the Shia. After the American invasion, it emerged as a very powerful player, and from 2005 to 2018, dominated the prime minister position, with al-Maliki holding the position from 2006 to 2014. The party, while previously embracing a more Shia Islamist platform, now is seen as leaning towards an Islamic democratic platform, maybe somewhat in the vein of the AKP in Turkey, although, quite frankly, it's actually probably better to describe them as just non-ideological, with the state of law coalition serving these days more as al-Maliki loyalist. They get the vast majority of their support from the Shia. In particular, it seems in comparison to the Sadrist, among the more wealthier merchants in the Shia community, and is better historically in places like Baghdad, Basra, and the Al-Muthanna Governorate. It currently has 38 representatives. Al-Maliki is currently the leader of the group, and after his stint as prime minister, served as vice president, albeit in a controversial role as his opponents claimed he legally never actually held the position. Al-Maliki, when in charge, helped establish the Muhassasha system, built up a powerful clientelistic system for his family and supporters, sold off Iraq's oil to international companies, and tried to toe the line of being both friendly with America and Iran. This earned Maliki a lot of enemies. He was viewed as helping set up and encourage corruption that currently permeates the Iraqi political system today. He was viewed by many of his reformist and populist opponents as selling out to foreign powers, particularly being a lapdog to the United States. But maybe the most damning legacy of al-Maliki's rule would be him contributing to Sunni distrust of the state. After an election in 2010 that saw Sunni-aligned politicians kept out of power, and some of them even arrested, along with reduced government spending and support to Sunni areas, this saw many Sunnis turn to insurgents, and in particular, the Islamic State. According to his critics, al-Maliki and his loyalist sectarianism and corruption led to the rise of one of the largest terror groups in the 21st century so far. After the 2014 election, the state of law emerged as the largest political bloc, but al-Maliki was widely disliked even among many of Iraq's political elites, and he was forced out of office. The coalition continues on up till today, but they are in a very weakened state. They just represent to many all of the worst in Iraqi's politics, and many religious Shia are able to more easily find a home in some other political bloc. It probably won't disappear anytime soon, but I'm skeptical it will rise to the heights it achieved in the 2000s. We go now to our first Kurdish party with the Kurdish Democratic Party, or Partia Demokrata Kurdistani, or the KDP. The KDP is one of the oldest parties in the country, being founded in 1946. It came to represent a wide selection of Kurdish nationalists, ranging from conservatives to socialists, all united in fighting for greater Kurdish autonomy, and loyal to the Barzani family, a family of Kurdish politicians that have dominated the party's leadership since its founding. It would lead several different revolts against various Iraqi governments starting in the 60s, and would aid the Iranians in the Iran-Iraq War, and the Americans in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. They are, with another Kurdish party we will talk about a bit later, largely responsible for the autonomy the Kurdistan region was able to achieve post-2003, and has dominated the politics of the region, helping build up the Peshmerga, the Kurdish military, into a sizable fighting force, able to largely occupy the north of the country, and even put up an independence referendum in 2017. It remains today the largest party in Iraqi Kurdistan. It ideologically has shifted towards being a more firmly right-leaning nationalist group, calling for the independence of Iraqi Kurdistan, but still remains a party by and for the Barzani political dynasty. It generally gets the most support in northern and western Kurdistan. It currently has 31 representatives, is the largest party in the Kurdish parliament, and the governors of Duhok and Erbil are seemingly members of the party. It is currently headed by Masoud Barzani, the former president of the Kurdistan region. Its position on the status of the Kurdish nation has changed at several points, at first arguing for further decentralization for the Kurdistan region, to setting up a federal Iraq, to arguing for full independence, until today where it seems to be going back towards arguing for a federalist model. It is also supportive of friendly relations with the West and Turkey. Its historical legacy of being a party that has called for Baghdad's influence to weaken in the north, and it frequently working with foreign powers, means it's viewed by some as an insurrectionist party that seeks to divide up and weaken the Iraqi nation, and is a pawn for foreign powers. The 2017 referendum in particular was viewed by outsiders of being used to exploit the weak position Iraq was in after battling the Islamic State, and would bring about greater instability in the region. The referendum resulted in the Iraqi army and Shia paramilitaries taking the Kurdish-controlled city of Kirkuk and forcing the Peshmerga out of large chunks of northern Iraq. This resulted in the KDP being viewed as gambling with the future of Kurdistan and Iraq, and ultimately ending up losing. In Kurdistan itself, many of its detractors accuse it of being corrupt, being tribalistic, reactionary, and of having no firm ideology, but supporting the Barzanis, and of silencing dissent against their rule by force. While the State of Law and the KDP are very different parties in terms of political ideology, they actually are quite similar, being founded in the mid-20th century, opposing Saddam, although the KDP would actually work with Saddam in the late 90s, and becoming a part of the corrupt establishment post-2003. While unlike the State of Law, the KDP hasn't suffered as much of a fall from grace, there are increasing signs slowly more and more Kurds are becoming fed up with the KDP and what they stand for. Many of those Shia paramilitaries that took Kirkuk from the Peshmerga find a home in our next group, the Conquest Alliance, or Etila al-Fatih, or Fatah. The Fatah Alliance was formed in 2018, in the run-up to the legislative elections that year, as an alliance of several Shia pro-Iranian militias, known as the Popular Mobilization Forces, and parties. Some of the largest and most notable are the Badr Organization, the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq, and Azzam al-Haq. In that year's election, they managed to become the second most voted for bloc, getting over 13% of the vote. This would, however, drop down the next election for reasons I'll talk about in a bit. It positions itself as a more devoutly Islamist party when compared to the Sadrist and the State of Law, getting support from the Popular Mobilization Forces, those friendly with Iran, and leans into somewhat of a right-wing populist rhetoric, opposing corruption, and hostile towards Iraq's non-Shia minorities, westernization, and the West more broadly. It last election got the most support along the Iranian border, especially in Mayassin and Diyala Governorate. It currently has 29 representatives, and the governors of Babel, Mayassin, and Al-Muthana are seemingly members of the coalition. It is currently headed by Heidi El-Ameri, the head of the Badr organization's political and military wing, and also former Minister of Transport. Fatah is viewed by its opponents as attempting to form a parallel state to the Iraqi government, of being fake outsiders, and of being under the control of Iran. Many of the organizations making up Fatah are not only ideologically friendly towards Iran, but are often directly funded by Iran and its Revolutionary Guard Corps. This makes it seem like it's a party that isn't actually for Iraq, but just serves to aid Iran in achieving its geopolitical interest. While in 2018 they argued they were outsiders who were going to clean up corruption, many parties in the alliance actually were fairly well established, with the Islamic Supreme Council being a very important player in the 2000s, and several members of the coalition being former ministers. They also aided the government in suppressing protests in 2019 against corruption. This hurt its image as radical populist, which may help explain why it lost over half its support in the 2021 election. Fatah has claimed the election was rigged against them, but at the end of the day, they still participate in the government with many of the establishment parties. Finally, the Fatah Alliance and its militias are seen as building parallel institutions to the Iraqi state. While the Popular Mobilization Forces are supposed to merge into the regular Iraqi army, many of the militias still remain active and act independently of the Iraqi state, sometimes engaging in counterterrorism activities against Islamic State remnants, attacking American military bases in the country, and other times using death squads to kill critics and undesirables. This all concerns many in the Iraqi state who fear they can't control these popular militia groups and are being used to enforce sectarian violence across Iraq. We go back to the Kurds with the Patriotic Union for Kurdistan, or Yakuti Nestelmani Kurdistan, or PUK. The PUK was formed in the 70s as a leftist breakoff of the KDP, decrying tribalism and the personalist politics of the party. While it did align with the KDP in terms of fighting for Kurdish autonomy from Ba'athist Iraq, it also quickly became a fierce rival to the KDP, with the Kurdistan region de facto divided between the KDP-controlled north and west, and the PUK-controlled south and east. In the 90s, the PUK and the KDP even ended up going to war against each other. During the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the KDP and PUK worked together and nowadays are able to live with each other, although tensions still exist. For example, in the aftermath of the 2017 independence referendum, both the KDP and PUK blamed each other for the failure of the referendum. Initially, its support base was among largely urban, educated, and leftist Kurds, but these days, it's more just the party for those who support the Talabani political dynasty and gets more support in southern Kurdistan. It currently has 17 representatives and is the second largest party in the Kurdish parliament. It is currently headed by Bathil Talabani, a commander in the PUK's military wing. Also, the president of Iraq, Abdul Latif Rashid, is a member of the party, with every president of Iraq since 2005 being a member of the PUK. The PUK generally gets described as a center-left social democratic party, and it is pretty firmly an ally of the leftist Kurdish Workers' Party that operates in Turkey, although it is also friendly with the conservative Iranian state. But similar to the KDP, the main ideology leading the party is loyalism to its head family. While it initially was a party calling out corruption in Kurdish leadership, it has largely become what it was created to destroy, a corrupt party. Several breakoffs have occurred in recent years from ex-members upset with the direction the party is taking. Among Iraqis more broadly, it can be viewed like the KDP as a separatist party seeking to divide up the Iraqi nation, and is very much a part of the Muhashsasa system. But at the same time, KDP supporters would say they are kind of fake nationalist, seeing as it's believed PUK elements of the Peshmerga left their posts once the Iraqi army was sent to stop the 2017 referendum. The PUK in turn accused the KDP of being short-sighted and poorly planning the referendum in the first place. Regardless of who is at fault, Iraqi Kurdistan remains under Iraqi control. And it remains under two highly corrupt parties that, while powerful, are seemingly losing support as new rising forces enter Kurdish politics, decrying the two old dinosaur parties of the KDP and PUK. We go next to the extension movement, or Hayraktat Emtidad. While most of the other groups we have talked about, or parts of those groups, are at least a decade old, Emtidad is relatively young, being founded only in 2020. They came from supporters of those 2019 protesters that I mentioned earlier, being an extension of those protests. It seemingly presents itself as a party that will fight corruption, oppose sectarianism, and reform the country, with most of its supporters being young Iraqis fed up with the current establishment. It, based on the 2021 results, did better in the Shia South, particularly in the Dukar Governorate. It, since entering the Council of Representatives, has worked closely with the Kurdish New Generation movement, which I will touch upon later. While it isn't entirely powerless, it is fairly weak compared to pretty much all the other parties we have touched up on so far, and its principal position of refusing to work in the government and get any ministerial roles means it lacks the influence to bring about any real change. It also has seen infighting in the movement over the direction the party should go, and the handling of the party itself. If it can grow over the next several years, it might be able to push for some reform, but right now it seems relatively weak and in danger of becoming irrelevant if it can't keep up the momentum of the 2019 protest. It currently has 16 representatives. It is currently headed by Ala al-Rikabi, a representative. We go back to the Sunni parties with the Resolve Alliance, or Talhalv Azzam. Azzam, like Emtidad, is another recently formed party, this time being a party formed from various high-level Sunni politicians, and parties uniting in a political bloc before the 2021 election. It came behind Takadum, but still got a decent amount of support, getting the most support north of Baghdad, and doing best in the Diyala Governorate. Information on the group seems somewhat sparse, although it seems they are planning next election on contesting with the Matahidun, a party formerly influential among the Sunni community. It overall seems similar to Takadum, supporting Sunni interests and being largely driven by elite politics. It currently has 14 representatives. It is currently headed by Muthana al-Samurai, a businessman. Next we go to the Victory Alliance, or Italaf al-Nasr. The Victory Alliance was formed back in 2018 as a coalition for then Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. Al-Abadi was, and actually still is, a member of the Islamic Dawa party, and was elected to Prime Minister in 2014 after al-Maliki was forced out of power. Al-Abadi and al-Maliki quickly became rivals and critical towards each other, dividing up the Dawa party in two, with one wing loyal to al-Abadi and one loyal to al-Maliki. Al-Abadi tried to set up the Victory Alliance as a coalition similar to the state of law in the 2000s, with it being dominated by the Dawa party members, but also working with other actors across the country. It presented itself as a more nationalistic alternative and credited al-Abadi for defeating the Islamic State in 2017. In 2018, they actually managed to get a decent amount of support in both Sunni and Shia parts of the country, with over 10% of the vote nationwide. However, in the 2021 election, they shrunk down to a largely Shia force and lost their commanding position, getting just a little over 4% of the vote. Al-Abadi lost the prime ministerial position in 2018, and while he still remains a representative, him and the party are greatly diminished. It currently has 11 representatives. So let's look at a party I briefly touched up on, the New Generation Movement, or Kula Nui Nui Noe. I definitely butchered that. It is very similar to Emtidad, being a protest party protesting corruption, this time in the Kurdistan region. It seeks to break the power of the KDP and PUK, backs liberalization in the economy, and backs greater women and minority rights. It is right now a rising star in Kurdish politics, with a lot of support among younger Kurds, those sick of the status quo in Kurdistan, businessmen, and seemingly with more support in southern Kurdistan. In recent elections for Kurdish parliament, it emerged as the third largest party, with just a little under 14% of the vote. However, despite this growth, it struggles with accusations of corruption, infighting, and the fact that other parties have tried to usurp the KDP and PUK dominance in Kurdistan, and they have all largely failed. This seemingly is because the KDP and PUK are so large and powerful, they have enough resources to crush any upstart politically. The opposition movements tend to struggle with infighting, and end up losing their opposition street cred once they reach any level of influence. If the New Generation movement can escape these trappings remains to be seen. It currently has 9 representatives and, as stated earlier, is the third largest party in Kurdish parliament. It is currently headed by Shashwara Abdulwahid, a businessman. So I've largely been focusing on the 3 largest communities parties, but let's actually go to a party 4, one of the smaller minority communities. The Babylon movement, or Harakatu Babiluna, is a party based around defending the Assyrian community of Iraq. It was formed in the context of the Islamic State advancing across the Nineveh Plains, the homeland of the Assyrian people, with it initially being formed as a militia, a part of the Popular Mobilization Forces. Later on, the militia would form a political party, with it serving as a vehicle to get Assyrians into office, advocating for their community, and being friendly with Iran. Now, one would expect it would be like the German Minority Election Committee in Poland or the Malaysian Indian Congress in Malaysia, a party that gets the most support and most party elites are from their respective minority community. However, this isn't the case for the Babylon movement, at least that's what their detractors claim, with its critics arguing it is mostly backed by Shia Muslims, voting in the reserved Christian seats. The leader of the movement, Rayyan al-Kidabi, is actually accused of being a Chaladian convert to Islam, and several bishops within the Chaladian Catholic Church denounce him. The party and militia have been accused of corruption, being puppets of Iran, and of apparently actually sacking Assyrian homes, the opposite of their original goal. This upcoming election apparently has several smaller Assyrian parties all banding together to try and beat the Babylon movement back, but we'll have to see how successful they will be, especially if the Babylon movement uses its militias to attack its opponents, or if they get enough non-Christians voting to overwhelm the actual Christian voting bloc. It currently has 4 representatives and has a member in Kurdish parliament. Al-Kidani is currently the movement's military head. We go to our last Kurdish party with the Kurdistan Justice Group, or Komeli Dajri Kurdistan. Komeli was formed in 2001 as a breakoff of the Kurdish Islamic movement, which had formed its own de facto state along the Iran-Iraq border in the 90s. Komeli was formed as a more moderate breakoff, still Islamist, opposing progressive social movements, and sympathetic towards Islamic organizations like the Taliban, but still willing to work with other Kurdish groups like the KDP and PUK in an institutional framework. It is fairly small, but does have a sizable support base in the Suleymaniya Governorate, and is able to always get at least some representation in the Kurdish parliament. However, other Kurdish Islamic groups, like the Kurdistan Islamic Union, does somewhat limit their growth, as both are very ideologically similar. It currently has 2 representatives in the Council of Representatives, and has 3 seats in Kurdish parliament. It is currently headed by Ali Bayber, a former representative. For the last party I'll spend any amount of time going over, we have the Iraqi Turkmen Front, or Iraq Turkmen Cephisur, or ITF. ITF was formed in the 90s as a coalition of various Turkmen parties that sought to defend the rights of their community, and has proposed a Turkmen-based autonomous zone around Kirkuk. They also are viewed as friendly with the Turkish state, being accused by their opponents of being a tool of the Turkish state to influence Iraqi politics. The ITF at the national level is fairly small, but in the Kirkuk Governorate, they actually do have a very sizable support base, able to compete with the much larger Kurdish parties that operate in the region. It currently has one representative. It is currently headed by Hasan Turan, a former representative. So those parties were some of the biggest players in the country, but there are many more parties that exist in Iraq. As a brief rundown of some notable ones, you have plenty of local parties largely existing in one or two governorates. Some notable parties in this group are the Azzam Alliance in Basra, or the Our People Are Our Identity group in the Saladin Governorate. In the Kurdistan region, there are several small parties with some presence in the Kurdish parliament. There's the People's Front, a breakoff of the PUK, the Goran movement, which is another breakoff of the PUK that briefly looks like it might be a prominent third force in a similar vein to the New Generation movement, but has suffered with infighting, and the National Stance movement, evidence of infighting in the Goran movement, as they were a breakoff of them. There are several minority parties, the Yazidi Movement for Reform and Progress, a party representing Yazidi interest, and the parties making up the Azzam Alliance, a coalition of Assyrian parties hostile towards the Babylon movement. Finally, some other notable parties include the National Wisdom Movement, a Shia coalition formed as a breakoff of the Islamic Supreme Council of Iraq that has several governors, the Iraqi National Congress, a liberal party that aided the US in the 2003 invasion and formerly was somewhat influential in the 2000s but has largely fallen from grace, the Iraqi Constitutional Monarchy, a party who historically argued for the Hashemites to return as the rulers of the country, and finally the Iraqi Communist Party, which I briefly mentioned earlier. The Communist Party is the oldest party still active and has played an important role in several different political coalitions and supported anti-corruption protests in 2019. Notably, the Ba'ath Party still does exist. However, the Ba'ath Party is officially banned, and de-Baathification has made ex-Ba'ath Party members and officials largely banned from entering politics. Instead, Ba'ath Party loyalists tend to operate underground or violently, with historically several Ba'ath insurgents groups operating in the country. But these days, they either are no longer active or lying in wait. Iraq does have several militant groups operating inside its territory that aren't directly at war with the Iraqi state, such as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, although they may be disbanding soon based on its leader calling for a ceasefire, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which I talked about in my Iran political parties episode. Check that out. Little self-promotion never killed anyone. Along with the various popular mobilization forces affiliated militias that are quasi-sanctioned by the government. As I'm sure many of you know, probably the largest militant group operating today is the Islamic State, which does still launch terror attacks and operates in the northern Sunni regions of the country, but since 2017 has been greatly diminished. So those are the parties of Iraq. In conclusion, there's a variety of parties, typically based around a single community, the Shia, Sunni Arabs, Kurds, or some other minority group in the country. They typically have little or no real ideology, and are generally personality-driven groups. Just recapping, some of the largest Shia groups are the nationalistic-leaning Sadrist, al-Maliki's State of Law, and the Iranian-backed Fatah Alliance. The largest Sunni group right now is the Takadum party, a liberal-ish party, and the largest Kurdish groups are the Western and Turkish-backed KDP, and the Iranian and PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, backed PUK. The fragmentation of Iraqi politics, corruption, and the muhasasha system has led to increased dissatisfaction in the country, something that sadly looks unlikely to change. Elections later this year may hopefully bring about some help in resolving these tensions, but quite frankly, it does seem unlikely. I do hope that if you are Iraqi, you go out and vote for a candidate who will work well for you. So, that's the episode. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. Up next, I'm going to be doing the history of Cyprus. Then I will do the history of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Again, I do unrecognized countries for my history episodes. And then I'll do Lithuanian political parties. And for those who like my political parties episodes, just know that in the coming schedule, I think there will be more political parties kind of coming up. But yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. If you want, you can email me at whydocountries@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.